Welcome back to SM Sports Radio. We are back in Seneca, South Carolina this week after our trip to Atlanta last week to see at least 2 games of what was supposed to be a 3-game series. Shout out to the rain in Atlanta, Georgia, which was not necessarily our best friend over that 3-day stretch, but
hey, speak for yourself. It prevented a 3-game sweep of the Braves by the Reds and shortened it down to only a 2-game sweep. So I am actually very thankful for the rain, even though it kind of shortened our trip, if you will.
Yeah, the Reds probably got the Braves at pretty much the best time possible this season, so great for me to see.
That lineup for Game 2 was
atrocious.
Absolutely terrible.
So bad. And then we had the Zach Short cannon from second base
My
that
goodness.
ended up somehow behind Short in multiple ways in the outfield. So shout out Zach Short. You're probably never going to do anything else of note to get mentioned on the podcast. No offense, but kind of a little bit. Anyway, today we are going to be running through our college football playoff predictions. So it's finally that time of year, less than a month now from college football starting, or at least close to that. Let's go, college football. And then we're going to be talking some MLB Trade Deadline, give you our winners and losers from that. And that's pretty much going to be it because there's a lot to talk about between those two things. So I don't know about you, but I am ready to get into this playoff prediction, and I will go ahead and let you lead it off.
All right, so how do we want to do this? Do we want to start from the number 1 overall seed? Do we want to start from some at-larges? How do we want to do
Yeah,
that?
let's just go through 1 through 12, or let's go quadrant by quadrant. No, let's go 1 through 12. Let's go 1 through 12.
So am I just hitting you with all of them, or are we going
No, we're going
piece
one by
piece?
one.
All right.
We don't want to.
My top overall seed in the 2025 college football playoff is going to be the Ohio State Buckeyes. And no, it is not because Quinshon Judkins has a broken spin move in the video game. It is for other reasons, including the fact that Quinshon Judkins is on the team. But unfortunately, for Ohio State, his spin move is not as overpowered in real life as it is in the game.
But with PEDs.
At least we think.
With PEDs, anything is possible.
Yes. Ohio State gets a transfer quarterback in Will Howard, who, if nothing else, brings some veteran leadership and is an upgrade, quite frankly, over Kyle McCord from last season. I think he's going to benefit from having a better offensive line up front and a better receiver core. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson is going to be one of, if not the best backfield duos in all of college football next season. And I'm projecting Ohio State to have a top 3 defense. So you combine all those factors together and the fact that they don't have an overly tough schedule comparatively to some other Big Ten teams. So obviously I like Ohio State to take down Oregon during the regular season. So in light of all these things, Ohio State is my top overall seed.
I could definitely see them making it there. Like you said, that's an absolutely incredible team. I'm curious to see what Jeremiah Smith does for them in his freshman year, how much you see from him. He's going to be an incredible player, I think. And a lot of you Ohio State fans that were defending Kyle McCord last year, or other fans that were defending Kyle McCord, you're about to see how not good Kyle McCord was with the numbers that Will Howard's going to put up in this offense this year. But I have a different Big Ten team at my number 1. It is the Oregon Ducks. I'm a big believer in Dan Lanning. That's what a lot of this comes down to. I love Dylan Gabriel. The experience from Dylan Gabriel I think is going to be huge for the Ducks offense. We talk about Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, it seems like every week in this Oregon offense, but this Oregon secondary I think is going to be really, really good this year. Got some great athletes back there. You always have sideline-to-sideline speed from Oregon in the linebacker position. Whether or not that can necessarily translate to penetration, it's yet to see, but that's not something I really worry about with a Dan Lanning defense. I feel like you're going to get penetration up front from them. So kind of like you talked about with Ohio State, you combine all those things into one, and I think you end up with a very, very good team in the Oregon Ducks. And what really does it here for me is the fact that Ohio State has to play at Oregon. I think that's the game that decides which one of these teams is at the top here at the end, and I have that going to Oregon, so I have Oregon as my number 1.
So is it fair for me to assume that we're in agreement that the winner of that game ends up becoming the number 1 overall seed?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'll see where I have Oregon, but they're pretty much going to headline my at-larges, so I think Oregon's a top 3 team in the country. I obviously lean Ohio State, which is why Ohio State takes number 1 for me, but all those factors you just mentioned, I could also see a path to number 1 for the Oregon Ducks as well. My number 2 overall seed, and the team that I have been high on ever since transfer portal season even, is going to be the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss the number 2 overall seed for me. I obviously have them winning the SEC title game. They do lose Quinshon Judkins, but I think Jackson Dart under this Lane Kiffin offense is poised to have a monster year in the SEC. This is kind of the year of the quarterback in the Southeastern Conference, and I think Jackson Dart is right up there with the rest of the bunch. I think Ole Miss is going to take some strides on defense due to some portal additions, and I think their schedule is moderately favorable. They get Georgia at home most considerably. I think they have a good chance to go into Tuscaloosa at Alabama, come away with a win in that game as well. And so Ole Miss is my number 2 seed overall.
Yeah, and Samuel's been on Ole Miss, I think, longer than he's giving himself credit for here, because even at the very end of last season, once we had like rivalry week bowl season, he was like, Ole Miss next season, Ole Miss next season. So he's been on them for a while. I think they're going to be a very good team, and everyone talks about them losing Quinshon Judkins. There's a reason he transferred. Ulysses Bentley behind him was, by a yards per carry basis, he was better last season, which I don't think enough people are talking about. Ulysses Bentley is a very good back down there, and you talk about the years where Ole Miss kind of owned Alabama, honestly, in Oxford a few years ago. When you look at that, and when this team is good, that place is rocking down there. I think it's going to be very hard for Georgia to win at Ole Miss, but I'll talk about them a bit later. My at-large section, kind of a bit of a spoiler there, but my number 2 is the Clemson Tigers, who I think go undefeated. And
whoa! You have Clemson beating Georgia week 1?
I do.
Oh my God!
I've looked at that. I've thought about it more, and I think that this is not saying Kirby Smart is going to not have Georgia ready to go. I think there is so much off-the-field stuff happening with Georgia right now.
Okay, I can really respect that take, because there are a lot of people who will say Georgia has a terrible culture. Georgia has a terrible culture. Georgia has a terrible culture. They're still going to go 11-1 and win the Natty. So I can actually respect the fact that you're someone who points out these off-the-field issues, these culture issues, if you will, if that's fair for me to say. And you're also not just shoving that under the rug and saying, like, because if you think culture matters and that Georgia doesn't have a good culture, it's kind of a disingenuous argument just to say, oh, Georgia's still going to go 11-1, 10-2, 12-0, and kind of sweep that under the rug, which I feel like a lot of pundits are doing. They'll criticize Georgia on social media, but then they'll say, oh, Georgia's going to beat Clemson by 28 points in week 1. So I can actually respect that a lot. I appreciate that.
And I've loved the development of this Clemson offensive line. The more I look at it, the more I think, although I don't necessarily expect them to be dominant versus Georgia by any means, but I think they can hold it up well enough to at least give Cade Klubnik time. And if Cade Klubnik has time, the speed Clemson now has at receiver, you need speed at receiver to be good nowadays. And I think they have that, and Garrett Riley is going to be able to get those guys in space. I'm liking this matchup the more I look at it for Clemson.
And let me just say, there is a world where Clemson has a 5-wide package with, bear with me here, Antonio Williams, Tyler Brown, TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, and Brenningstool at the tight end.
That's dangerous.
That is 5 dynamic playmakers, and that's not even sunshine pumping from a Clemson student right here. That is the cold, hard facts. Jake Brenningstool is a tight end that people, quite frankly, aren't really talking about this offseason. Absolute stud. Had a great game at Miami, a game that Clemson lost, but a game that Clemson would have been blown out if it were not for Jake Brenningstool's heroics. A couple big-time touchdown catches in that game. And I think a lot of this is going to come down to the fact when we see if TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco are ready to contribute on day 1. I'm pretty much certain that Bryant Wesco is going to be ready from the first snap, just because he's been at Clemson since the spring. He's taken a lot of reps with the first team from what I've heard. My only question mark is, can TJ Moore learn this offense in fall camp that starts in 2 days and learn it to the point where he can elevate himself over some veteran guys that Clemson has? Troy Stellato, Adam Randall, Cole Turner. Those are all going to be guys that he's fighting for playing time for.
Well, the good news for him is, even if he isn't necessarily well-versed in that, I still think you can plug him in under Bryant Wesco, because
absolutely.
You'll have Wesco, you'll have Antonio Williams. Obviously, you mentioned Brenningstool, who I think is your Mackey Award winner this year, honestly.
Wow.
So
the Clemson love from Micah,
I know,
it's making me blush.
The more I've looked at this team, the more I really like how they match up. And you mentioned the culture problem. I just think that if you're Georgia coming in with all this off the field stuff, all this kind of culture problem you have under Kirby Smart, you're facing an exact opposite culture with Dabo and Clemson, where even though people make fun of Dabo for being corny or whatever, that team is a cohesive unit. It really is. And
it's a family, quite frankly.
Yeah, the culture at Clemson is really good. So I know it's kind of cheesy to say culture matchup, but I think if you go in, and it's not like Clemson doesn't have the talent. And what we haven't even talked about yet is the Clemson defense, which is incredible.
Or Phil Maffa.
Yeah, we haven't talked about Phil Maffa either. So I think Clemson matches up really well with Georgia. The more I look at this, I think Clemson wins that game, and I think they go undefeated. And frankly, if they do that, how are they not a top 2 seed?
Yeah, if you run the table with this schedule, which includes neutral site against Georgia, at Florida State, at
Virginia Tech,
we might see a rematch of one of those 2 games. We might see Miami in the ACC championship. Either way,
you won't see Miami.
We might. We'll see.
You won't see Miami.
We'll see. But yeah, that would be a nice road for Clemson to get to that number 2 overall seed. I actually have them at number 3 overall. I'm not quite sold on them beating Georgia in week 1, just to be frank with you all. And the fact of the matter is, though, I have Clemson running the table from that point on. I have Clemson going 11-1. A lot of people are already penciling in a loss in Tallahassee at Florida State. I just do not see a world where a DJ Uyangole-led team comes out and beats Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers. Obviously, a lot of familiarity there with DJ being the former quarterback for Clemson, but I definitely think that 10-2 is Clemson's floor. That might be a little generous, but their ceiling is 11-1 in my opinion. Maybe 12-0 if some things that Micah has projected come true, which I would definitely sign a contract and accept right this second, but not quite sold yet. I don't think this offense is going to be gelling enough on day 1 for it to really make it that big of a difference to beat Georgia. I do think, though, if Clemson can win the turnover battle in week 1, then they can win that game. Cade Klubnik's going to have to get the ball security issues under control this season, namely the fumbles. He's not terrible on the interceptions front last season, but Clemson will be my number 3 overall seed in this preseason projection.
Yeah, and the love for Tigers does not stop there, as I have the Missouri Tigers at number 3 in my projection here.
And everyone is shocked.
Yeah, I know. Everyone that knows me, their minds are absolutely blown by that. But I don't see how this Missouri team isn't getting more love. You look at everyone they brought back. Really, they're only missing Tyron Hopper, Cody Schrader, and their top 2 corners. The rest of this team basically is back. And this was a team that won a New Year's Six game last year. Eli Drinkwitz, I think, is improving as a coach year by year. And you look at the talent just from Brady Cook and Luther Burden. This is an incredible offense, at least potential-wise. And then for an SEC team, you look at their schedule, it's a cakewalk. They get Oklahoma at home, at Alabama. Those are really their only 2 tough games the entire year. Texas A&M,
a little bit tough.
Maybe a trap game, but by SEC standards, that is a cakewalk of a schedule for Missouri. So I definitely think they make the championship game. I think they beat whoever they meet there just because they're going to be less worn down by that point. You're going to have less guys banged up probably as a result of an easier schedule. And I think this is your 3rd and final undefeated team coming into the college football playoff. I think you see an undefeated SEC champion Missouri come in here at the number 3 spot. 3
undefeateds. I like the boldness there. I'm not as high on Missouri, and the reason is something you mentioned. Losing 2 cornerbacks, I think, in this quarterback-heavy SEC where there's a lot of top talent quarterbacks-wise in the SEC. You think of Ewers, Milroe, Beck, Dart, etc.
They hardly play any of those guys. They just get Jackson Arnold and Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, but I think they lose a game or 2 along the way. I don't think they win the SEC championship. So you'll see how I feel ultimately about Mizzou here down the line. But my number 4 overall seed is going to be the Utah Utes. Under the direction of Kyle Whittingham, who I believe is a top 5 coach in the country. I think a lot of people share that sentiment. You get Cam Rising back this season for what is his 80th season of eligibility. Yes, his 80th season of eligibility.
Cam Renfro.
Yeah. Cam Rising, another veteran quarterback, stepping into a Big 12 where there's a lot of youth. You do have Noah Fafita coming back as a sophomore who doesn't have a full year of starting under his belt. They're going to be really good. You have Avery Johnson, who we all know how I feel about Avery Johnson in Kansas State. He's going to be a first-year full-time starter with just one start last season and it being in the bowl game. So I think the fact that Rising comes in, it's either his third or fourth season of being the full-time starter at Utah. Obviously missed a good portion of last season with injury, but I think this paves a path for Utah, and I think the Big 12 is theirs for the taking. Their defense only allowed 19.7 points per game last season, 19.3, excuse me, which was 19th in FBS, and 82.8 rushing yards per game, which was 4th in FBS. And they only lose 4 starters from that defense. So my number 4 seed is going to be the Big 12 champion, Utah Utes.
I also have a Big 12 champion here because that's kind of how this seeding works under the new format. But for me, it is the Arizona Wildcats. And I think people are panicking about Jedd Fisch leaving. Oh no, Jedd Fisch, what are they going to do without Jedd Fisch? They brought in Brett Brennan, and I don't think that's going to be a household name, but he did a really, really good job rebuilding San Jose State over the last few years.
Shout out the San Jose State rebuild.
Yes, but he really kind of, if you guys don't get, I'm doing a San Jose State rebuild on EA College Football. That's what that was about. But Brett Brennan did a great job building them up from basically nothing to a team that has really been at the top of the Mountain West the last few years. And I think he's going to really mesh well with Arizona. You get Noah Fafita, like you've mentioned. Tedoroy McMillan is an incredible threat at receiver, probably one of the best 3 receivers in the country coming into this season. And Utah's obviously going to be tough. Oklahoma State obviously going to be tough. I just think Arizona is good enough to get over the top of those two teams and win this conference. I think the Big 12 is going to be a bloodbath. You mentioned Kansas State as well, even West Virginia, depending on what you get from Garrett Green this year. But for me, it's going to be Arizona taking that 4 spot.
Yeah, I could definitely see any of Kansas State, Arizona, or Utah winning the Big 12. I ultimately went with Utah, but a lot of respect for Arizona, specifically that offense, I think is going to be one of the most dynamic ones in the country. My number 5 seed and the number 1 at large is going to be the Oregon Ducks. I'm fine to say that this could be Oregon or Ohio State, depending on who ends up winning the Big Ten championship this season. I went with Ohio State, obviously, to have them in my number 1 spot. But for a lot of the reasons Micah mentioned that Oregon is his number 1 seed overall, that is why Oregon is my top at-large seed. You bring in Dylan Gabriel, who has had a fantastic college career, was absolutely phenomenal at UCF, had a bit of a down year for his standards at Oklahoma, but was still really good on a team that was not near as talented as the team that he walks into as the leader of this season. Dan Lanning is also one of my favorite coaches in all of college football, and quite frankly, one of the best motivators in all of college football as well. I think that he's going to have his team motivated on a week in and week out basis, and I don't think Oregon's transition to the Big Ten is going to be very tough at all. I think they step in on day one as contenders to win the conference, and they are my number 5 seed overall.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all that except the seed placement, as we've talked about already. Then in my number 5, I've just made a last-second change thinking about this, and I've changed it to the Texas Longhorns in my number 5 spot. I think this is the second best team in the SEC this year. I think it's really 2A and 2B. Honestly, from a talent level, I think it's 1A and 1B between Texas and Ole Miss. I think Missouri is probably the third most talented team, but Missouri with the easier schedule, I think wins the championship game. But I have Texas as my number 5 seed. I think a 1 or 2 loss SEC champion is really in line to get the first at-large bid with the way this committee works usually. And Quinn Ewers, I just think you're going to see incredible play from this year. His deep ball is one of the prettiest in college football. I think a lot of people get onto him about some potential accuracy issues, which are there, but also he is a great processor at the quarterback position, really doesn't make as many mistakes as a lot of people say he does. I think he's a great player, and I think Texas is more than good enough to get that first at-large bid.
Texas is actually my number 6 overall seed, so the second at-large for me, and for a lot of the same reasons that Micah has just underlined. But another thing that I want to mention is Texas got Isaiah Bond out of the portal, and he is absolutely
PTSD
incredible receiver.
The Iron Bowl.
Yeah, Micah does not want to relive that moment or revisit it in any way, shape, or form.
Freaking 007. Gosh.
But Texas obviously got a taste of success last year in the college football playoff. Ultimately came short in the semifinal against Washington, but I think you coupled that with the fact that Quinn Ewers is stepping into his third full season as the starting quarterback at Texas, and Texas is poised for an incredible season. I could see them winning the SEC even. I do have them once. Well, I'll get to that when we get to my next team. But Texas Longhorns, number 6 overall seed in Samuel Goodrow's preseason playoff prediction.
My number 6 seed is obviously you got to go with Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. I'm just kidding. It's Michigan. Michigan is my number 6 seed, and people seem down on Michigan. I don't understand why. I get you lost Jim Harbaugh and you lose J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum and Mike Sainer still, who's your slot corner. You have a better corner in Will Johnson, who is probably the best defensive player in college football going into the season. You could maybe argue James Pierce is right up there, and Mason Graham, who also plays for Michigan. He's their nose tackle.
Best DB, though, by far.
Yes, best DB by far. Absolute freak, though, Mason Graham up the middle for Michigan. This running attack, I think, is actually going to be even better this year. Donovan Edwards is an incredible player. Obviously, you missed Zach Zinter, who was kind of the leader of that offensive line, but the rest of the talent there is so good. I really don't think it makes too much of a big hole for them to have to replenish. Then I think you're going to see so much success in the read option game with Donovan Edwards and Alex Orji. Those are two guys who can both really run. Orji's going to be the quarterback this season for Michigan, and if this rushing attack is even better and Shamar Moore can really lean into that ability of Michigan to run the ball, I think they're good enough to beat Ohio State again. I think Michigan kind of owns Ryan Day, and I get there's going to be a ton of pressure from Ryan Day this year, but until I see him able to do it, I can't pick Ryan Day to beat Michigan right now.
I will just go ahead and say right now, on July the 30th at 8:15 p.m., if Ryan Day loses to Michigan again and Ohio State doesn't go on to win the national championship, get ready to learn Chinese, buddy. You are no longer the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes in this situation.
Get ready to learn action.
Yeah. But my number 7 overall seed is Michigan, and Micah kind of filled you in on why Michigan's going to be good this season. I have them one slot under Texas because I believe that Texas will go into the Big House and win that game. I believe that's week 2.
I think so, yeah.
But anyway, Michigan's going to be really good. I have them going 10-2 this season with losses to Texas and to Ohio State. And so, yeah, number 7, Michigan for me.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Michigan a lot already, and we've also talked about my number 7 a lot already, and that is Ohio State. I think Ohio State is going to be a 2-loss team that misses the Big Ten title game. I think Big Ten title game is going to be Oregon versus Michigan for the second time, as Oregon will travel to Ann Arbor to play them earlier in the year. But I think if Ohio State loses to Oregon and to Michigan, doesn't make their conference title game, the 7 is about the best they can hope for based on the rest of these teams. Don't get me wrong, I think Ohio State's an incredible team. I just think there's a lot of college football this year seems like it's very top-heavy. There's a clear, I would say, top 12 to 15 teams, and then within those, there's a clear top 8 for me. There's a clear top 8 teams here that I think are head and shoulders above the rest of college football. But I think Ohio State is definitely within that group. I think any one of those top 8, if you said X team wins the national title, I'd say, okay, I could see that happening. But I just think the schedule is going to fall a bad way for Ohio State this year. I think they end up with 2 losses and therefore the 7 seed.
I could definitely see a world where that is the case. And my number 8 overall seed is going to be the Georgia Bulldogs. I foresee Georgia losing probably 2 games, maybe 3 this season, which would be a down year for the standard of the Bulldogs, but that kind of season is not going to get you left out of the playoffs with as good as Georgia has been in recent years. I know that doesn't factor in at all officially in terms of the committee's eyes, but let's just be honest, it actually does.
Yeah.
Just the respect of a coach and a program gets you a long way in terms of these college football playoff rankings. And I believe that Georgia is going to have a good enough season to get in as an at-large. They're a team that I could see winning the national title. And I'm just really hoping they don't obliterate my Clemson Tigers in week 1. But Carson Beck, obviously really good. Got a nice running back tandem in ETN, and I forget the other guy's name off the top of my head right now. But we'll see on this Georgia offense. I think I'm not as high on Carson Beck as some other people are necessarily. Definitely think he's an incredible player and another guy that's stepping into year 2 as the full-time starting quarterback at an SEC school, which we keep talking about over and over again. I mean, Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, all these teams with just incredible quarterbacks, Alabama even. SEC quarterback play this season is going to be some of the best we've ever seen out of a conference in our lifetimes at least. And so Georgia is my number 8 seed, which would, if they won their first round game, would set up a matchup, Ohio State versus Georgia for me.
Yeah, my number 8 seed is Ole Miss. They are the third SEC team here for me. You've talked about Ole Miss a lot. We've both kind of talked about Ole Miss a lot, and there's a ton of transfers on this defensive line that is going to bring in a ton of talent. You look at Walter Nolan from A&M, Florida transfer Princely Uman Mielen, which if he ever puts effort in, he'll be an amazing player, but he likes to take half the drive off, so we'll see if he changes that at Ole Miss. But Jackson Dart is a great quarterback. I mentioned Ulysses Bentley earlier. I think is great. Trey Hawkins is such a good receiver for the Rebels. I think it's going to be a very high-flying offense, and you're finally going to see defense with it this year. I mentioned I think they are 1B behind Texas's 1A for most talented team in the SEC. But unfortunately, I think that's only good enough for an 8 seed this year with, like I said, kind of how top-heavy it is. But definitely Ole Miss, I expect to beat Georgia. I think that's really going to be a massive resume clincher for them as you look at all these other SEC teams where it's going to kind of be a logjam between a lot of these teams. And I just think Ole Miss is going to end up in the 8 spot, despite what I think is going to be a very, very good team this year.
So, obviously, Micah and I a little far apart on both Ole Miss and Missouri, but I can definitely see scenarios in which either one of us are right about either of those teams. Obviously, I had Ole Miss at my number 2 slot.
We basically just have them switch almost.
Moving on to my number 9 overall seed, yes, Avery Johnson in his first year as a full-time starting quarterback.
That beautiful lavender Corvette.
Yes, absolutely immaculate. If you haven't seen his new car, it is absolutely beautiful.
I want it.
His hair is absolutely beautiful, and Kansas State's uniforms are beautiful. So a lot of beauty going on in Manhattan, Kansas.
Yes.
Kansas State in a Big 12 that's going to feature a lot of high-flying offenses. Arizona, Utah is going to have a good offense. Kansas State obviously going to have a good offense. And Oklahoma State with Ollie Gordon is going to have a really good offense.
West Virginia.
I think Avery Johnson is going to have an incredible season. I think a lot of the reason Will Howard transferred to Ohio State is because he kind of heard the footsteps of the youngster in Avery Johnson. I don't think he's going to be good enough right away to lead Kansas State to a conference championship. I could see a world where that was the case, but I definitely lean Utah heavily to come out of the Big 12 as champions. But I do think Kansas State's going to be just good enough to get in that 9 spot. So they are my number 9 seed overall.
Yeah, I have a different Big 12 team here. I have Oklahoma State. I think that Ollie Gordon is going to be a fringe Heisman contender this season, and I really think that's who's going to carry this team. I love Avery Johnson. I love the Kansas State team. I think it's just one more year before you see them in the playoffs. I think they're just barely going to miss it this season. Alan Bowman is one of the more experienced players in college football quarterbacking Oklahoma State. I don't know how great of a player he is, but if you're experienced enough to at least read the field well and hand the ball off to Ollie Gordon, I think your team's going to be pretty successful. And Mike Gundy, we know what a great coach he is down there at Oklahoma State. I think they're going to be the second best Big 12 team this year, and so I have them in the 9.
Number 10 overall for me is going to be the Arizona Wildcats, a team that Micah has already covered extensively as his Big 12 champion. Obviously, you know what you're going to get from Tetaroya McMillan and Noah Fafita. My only question is, does this team have a smooth transition from the post-Jed Fish era? I think that's going to take a little bit of getting used to just for this team in general. I'm not as high on Arizona's defense as I am on Utah's, which is why I don't have them winning it all. I do think it's kind of a coin flip to see who's going to be 9 or 10 between Kansas State and Arizona, but ultimately, for me, it's going to be Arizona at the 10.
Yeah, I have Utah in the 10, and we both have 3 Big 12 teams in the 4, 9, and 10 seeds. So we kind of feel like we have a decent grasp on what's going to happen in this conference. We just disagree on the teams a little bit. I just think Utah's offense is not quite dynamic enough. Cam Rising is a very good player. I just don't think you have necessarily the outside weapons, the skill position weapons at Utah to match up with an Oklahoma State or an Arizona, though I do think you will have the best defense in the conference. In Utah, Kyle Whittingham, you mentioned, is an incredible coach, but just don't think it's quite enough for Utah this season. I still think they're a playoff team, definitely think they're a very good team, but just the 10 seed for me.
I kind of spoiled this a little bit earlier, but the number 11 seed for me is going to be the Missouri Tigers, another team where me and Micah are a little farther apart on than some of these other teams. I just think losing 2 starting cornerbacks in this SEC is a little bit brutal. I'm sure they have some talented guys to kind of plug and play there. I think Toriano Pride returns for Missouri, who's actually a Clemson transfer and a really good player. I think he's going to be able to step in and possibly be CB1 for them. He showed a lot of flashes both last year and in his career at Clemson. But ultimately, for me, I don't think Missouri is quite ready to win the SEC this season. I think they probably drop a game or 2 in the conference this season. Not sure which 2 it would be. Probably Alabama and one of Oklahoma or Texas A&M for me. But they are my number 11 seed. Could definitely see them going 11-1 and having a SEC championship berth. But I'm not sure if this team, top to bottom, is ready to contend for the SEC title this season.
Yeah, there's definitely potential at the cornerback spot for Missouri. I know you talked about losing players, but they got Drayden Norwood from Texas A&M to come and be that other corner across from Toriano Pride Jr., so I think they've kind of managed to reload at that position. I don't think they're quite Ennis Rakestraw, and gosh, the other guy's name escapes me right now. Chris Abrams-Drain. I don't think they're quite those guys, but I still think they're definitely talented out there on the corners for Missouri. So, but I've talked about Missouri a lot already. My number 11 is the Georgia Bulldogs, a team you guys were probably starting to get concerned that I might not have in here at all. I mentioned what I think about the culture problems at Georgia. I think those are going to come back to bite them eventually. And when I look at the schedule, I see 3 losses immediately. I've already talked about the Clemson game. I think they lose that game. I think they lose at Texas. I think they lose at Ole Miss. That's already 9-3. And then if they drop a game at Alabama, if they're not ready to play there and Alabama's rocked and they beat Georgia, that's an 8-4 Georgia team. And honestly, it becomes touch and go then of who makes it between Georgia and Alabama in this 11 spot. I still think Georgia will play other teams close enough, especially I think they stay in the Ole Miss game for a while. I think they do barely sneak in the 11, but I think that a lot of Georgia fans might have a bit of a rude awakening here for this team, which it's kind of funny because I have Carson Beck as my number 1 or my number 3 guy to win the Heisman this year, and that's more based on the potential, I think, of this Georgia team if they put it all together, because Carson Beck, if Georgia's held back, it's not going to be by Carson Beck. That's what I'll say. I think Carson Beck is a top 2 player on this team. I think he's incredible. I think he's very underrated. He's shown amazing processing ability, has great accuracy, great arm talent, and you know what you're getting from Trevor Etienne, was a great back for Florida while he was there. I don't know how much you can keep dealing with all the off-the-field stuff and potential issues at skill positions, and you lost a ton of offensive line talent, and can you keep reloading this defense year after year? I just think there's going to be problems for Georgia. I think it's really going to make itself known this year. This is the hardest schedule they've had in a very long time, and I frankly, I don't think they're ready for it. I think they barely sneak in at the 11 spot.
Yeah, definitely a lot of off-the-field issues for Georgia. Ironically, I'm less high on Carson Beck, but I'm higher on Georgia than you, which is just really weird. I had Georgia in my 8 spot, but I would love to see them struggle this season, just quite frankly.
Well, you guys see what I'm wearing. You know I would love to see them struggle. And it's not – I do want to preface, this is not just I have Georgia tanked because I'm a Florida fan. I genuinely think this is going to happen. I'm not tanking any team specifically because of any particular fandom.
Yes, and my number 12 seed is going to come from the group of 5, as is kind of the custom, the new rule.
Tradition.
It's going to be the Conference USA champions, the Liberty Flame. And Caden Salter.
Flames, plural.
Flames, excuse me.
A singular flame.
One flame,
they
one
have the
giant
Olympic
flame.
torch up there.
Yes, one big flame. No, the Liberty Flames, Caden Salter in his 6th season of college football. I think this schedule is just absurdly easy, almost a bit of a joke. If you just look that up for yourself, it's pretty much a cakewalk. And I think a veteran quarterback coupled with some returning weapons on the outside, Liberty's poised to make a run this season. They got a taste of what big boy football is like last season in their bowl
Yes.
game versus Oregon, and I am actually projecting a rematch here. Oregon and Liberty will meet for the second consecutive season in postseason play, this time with a little higher stakes and probably less opt-outs.
Well, that would definitely be interesting. I still don't think Liberty would be able to pull that off, but my number 12 seed is USF. And when you look at this schedule, I think USF wins the American. That's how they get there. But I think that if they win the American and Liberty wins CUSA, USF's resume is going to be so much more impressive. I think they win at Tulane. I think they beat Memphis at home. They beat UAB at home. Those are all incredible wins versus the cupcakes Liberty's going to be playing all year. And I'll say it now, I think USF beats Miami when they host them. I think USF beats Miami.
That's laughable.
I think they beat Miami. I think they're a good enough defense. You saw last year. I know it was a weird game. They almost beat Alabama last year.
Yeah, they did.
They almost beat Alabama last season. So what's to say if Miami goes in there looking past them, they don't beat Miami?
Okay, the issue for me with USF, you have two almost certain losses on that schedule. And let me go through Liberty's schedule right quick. Campbell, New Mexico State, UTEP, East Carolina, at App State, that's a loss. Home against FIU, at Kennesaw State, home against Jacksonville State, at Middle Tennessee, at UMass, home against Western Kentucky, and at Sam Houston. So only one game where they're probably not going to be favored. I could see them also not being favored at home against Jacksonville State, but I think they have the potential to win at App State. I don't think USF has the potential to win against Miami or USF, or against USF against themselves.
They beat themselves. That'd be
US or against Alabama, even though they did give them a run for their money last season. I do think USF is a playoff caliber team. I just think you're going to see 10-2 at best from USF, and I think you could see a 12-0 or 11-1 Liberty, which is what gets them the nod from me.
Yes, but it's not the power or the group of 5 team with the best record. It's the best ranked group of 5 conference champion. And if Liberty drops a game to App State, or even if they don't, if you have a USF team who has won at Tulane, they've beat Memphis, let's even say they lose to Miami. Let's say I'm wrong, they lose to Miami. Would you take a 10-2 USF that has losses only at Alabama and to Miami, but has beaten teams like at Tulane? They have a home win versus UAB. They have a home win versus Memphis. Florida Atlantic will be decent. They win at Florida Atlantic. You're not taking that resume over Liberty, who's played no one?
If that's the case, yes, I do, but I think they drop one of two against at Tulane or home against Memphis. I think they drop one of those two.
I just think that USF is. I think Alex Golesh is going to have them ready to go this year. I think they're going to be a very, very good team as far as group of 5 teams go. And I think even without the Miami upset that I think is going to happen, they would be in over Liberty just purely off strength of schedule if they win their conference.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see which group of 5 teams.
I think they would get obliterated by my 5 seed Texas.
Yeah, they definitely would. Before we move on from college football, I just want to kind of apologize for just crapping on Miami in the offseason. I think a lot of it has been due to the fact that I just don't think Mario Cristobal is that good of a coach. But I've kind of dug into this Miami team a little bit more over the past week. A lot of this being because of ACC Media Days. I just went through and just studied a lot of these rosters and transfer portal additions. Miami's going to have the best quarterback in the ACC in Cam Ward. They're going to have a top 3 running back in the ACC with Damian Martinez coming in from Oregon State, and they're going to have the best offensive line in the ACC. I don't think that's up for any debate.
No, it's not.
It's
the best offensive line easily.
And they're going to have a top 3 receiver in the ACC in Xavier Restrepo. So I think before we move on from this, Miami is the team that just barely misses the cut in terms of the college football playoff.
Really?
Yes. I have them in the ACC championship against Clemson. So obviously if they win that game, they're automatically in. But I think Miami has some potential to turn some heads this season. And I just want to apologize for the Miami slander because I have completely done a 180 on that position. So I just wanted to get that off my chest.
I think that's fair. I need to see Mario Cristobal do it once before I can give credit to a Mario Cristobal team.
I just think he's finally put together a roster this season, man.
And the team that he won the Rose Bowl with at Oregon, that team was so ridiculously loaded with NFL talent, and he still made it look underwhelming. I think I will say this, if Dan Lanning was the coach of this Miami roster, I have them as a 4 seed. I will say that. I just think Mario Cristobal is an elite recruiter. He's an elite coach in the trenches. That's why you see the offensive line is going to be so good. I think the defensive line is probably good. I'm worried he's going to make Cam Ward look a lot more average than he actually is.
And that's definitely fair. I just know that I had, in our previous breakdowns of Miami, I kind of didn't give Mario Cristobal enough credit simply because of the gaffe against Georgia Tech last year. I let that influence me a lot in terms of my predictions. I think Mario Cristobal is actually a very underrated coach. I think he's a top 3 coach in the ACC.
Oh, come on.
I think it goes Sweeney, Norvell, Mario Cristobal for me. Miami in the ACC championship game and the first team out of the college football playoff for Samuel Goodrow's preseason prediction.
No, but that you have Mario Cristobal over Jeff Brom as a coach.
Oh, easily. Not close.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll see what happens in Miami. Miami's going to be a team that I think causes a lot of debate this season. I would say right now I have them at 8-4.
Let me quickly pull up the schedule. And I will give you a live, not the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
Miami Hurricanes. So at Florida, I have them winning that game.
Unfortunately, I think they win that game. As much as that hurts me, I don't think Florida's going to win that game.
They're going to beat Florida A&M, Ball State, and South Florida to start 4-0.
I will say last week, or 2 weeks ago or something, I had a big rant on why Miami was not ready to play in Florida. I've done, like Samuel has, we've been looking at these teams more as we get closer and closer to the season, and I'm willing to admit I'm wrong on that. I think that Florida will struggle to play any kind of defense versus this Miami team. I think it's going to be a huge problem for them, and I don't think the Billy Napier offense moves the ball enough for them to be able to keep up.
Yeah, the thing for me is Miami is going to have, for me, head and shoulders the best offense in the ACC. Clemson is going to have the head and shoulders best defense in the ACC. So take that as you will in terms of ACC championship predictions. I think Clemson ultimately comes out on top because I think the gap between the Clemson offense and the Miami defense is bigger than the gap between the Miami offense and the Clemson defense. But I have Miami 4-0 so far. I will say I think I have them losing to Virginia Tech in week 5. That is one loss in conference. I have them winning at Cal, winning at Louisville, winning at home against Florida State, winning at home against Duke, winning on the road at Georgia Tech, winning at home against Wake Forest, and winning on the road against Syracuse. You're going to see an 11-1 Miami team with one loss in conference against an 11-1 Clemson team with no losses in conference. Clemson comes out on top in that game, even if they don't. The one contingency I have in terms of changing my college football playoff predictions, Clemson is the only team in the ACC that I could see getting in without being a conference champion. I think Miami maybe could if they only lose to Virginia Tech or Florida State. If they lose both of those, you're out of at-large contention. But just wanted to change my position on Miami after doing some further research, and just not only for that, but for another point of debate between us.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be really cool to see how it pans out.
I would see my 4 losses right now for Miami on the schedule is, I already mentioned my USF upset prediction. Then I think they lose to Virginia Tech. I think they lose at Georgia Tech. I think they lose at Louisville. Those are my 4 losses for them on the schedule right now. And honestly, I could see obviously the USF game being flipped because that's kind of a crazy upset prediction. And I think that the Florida State game could go the other way to where they lose that. You never know what's going to happen with rivalries. And then you could see the Louisville and the Georgia Tech games flip. But for me right now, I have them at 8-4 with those losses. I've said this a million times, I just don't trust Mario Cristobal to extract the best out of this roster.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be super interesting to see what happens in terms of college football as a whole, but also the Miami Hurricanes, just one of the most intriguing storylines in all of college football this season. And that pretty much wraps it up for real life football. Now let's get into some video game football. We have part 2 of the Kennesaw State and UNLV Dynasty. I'll let Micah lead it off with his progress with the Kennesaw State Owls.
Yes, so Urban Meyer and the Kennesaw State Owls went down to Louisiana to take on the Raging Cajuns in Week 3, and it was frankly a murder. They destroyed Louisiana, Kennesaw State. They were firing on all cylinders. Gabriel Binyard played incredible at the running back spot, and don't remember the final score. I don't have it on my photos, so I can't pull it up right now, but you'll see it in the edit right now. It'll be up on the screen. And then Week 4, they traveled to Columbia, Missouri to take on the Missouri Tigers, but they lost by about 50. So they went a lot worse in Week 4 for the Fightin' Owls of Kennesaw State. But we moved through the season. 1-2, I would say, is not bad with the lack of talent on the team. We are currently pursuing a 4-star receiver that I think might commit to Kennesaw State later in the year. Urban Meyer's trying to work his recruiting magic, offering some questionable things to this receiver to see if he'll commit to Kennesaw State or not. But we'll see what Urban Meyer can do on the recruiting trail. But right now the Owls sit at 1-2.
So Calvin Ridley and the UNLV Rebels, I believe it was.
Yes.
The UNLV Rebels actually had a bye week in Week 2. And in this bye week, they did some soul searching after the really tough loss at Houston. And they've decided, to heck with the Army option. We are going back to the spread.
It made it a whole one game.
Back to the spread. The option is too difficult in today's landscape of EA college football.
You guys see, I did not know this happened.
Way too frustrating. So during Week 2, we actually made the switch back to the spread, which if you know me as a player, I just like the spread a lot. Mm-hmm. I have a playbook that
appropriate for Calvin Ridley to run the spread though.
Yes. Absolutely. That was a really good pun there. But I have a hidden gem playbook that I have discovered in College Football 25. Comment below on this video if you want me to tell you what playbook I run. We have moved to the spread. Unfortunately, the competition did not get any easier as we traveled on the road to Lawrence, Kansas to face the Kansas Jayhawks. And let me just tell you, it was not pretty. Jalen Daniels was RPOing us to death. They were running the ball down our throats all game. We had no chance. We gave up 2 touchdowns after going 3 and out on our first drive. Kansas got the ball first, scored 3 and out, punt. They scored again. We got on the board with a nice, can't remember the play, but you'll see it right now. To cut it to 14-7, and that was about as close as it got. Here was the final score. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
It'll be right here.
It was not pretty at all for the UNLV Rebels, but thankfully got the 2 Power 5 or Power 4 games out of the way.
Yes. Man, we're going to be saying
season.
Power 5 so much this year, and we're going to have to no, the Pac-12 died.
And we heard from Micah about what Urban Meyer's recruiting tactics are. What Calvin Ridley has been doing is he actually has a deal with a local casino, kind of an underground casino, if you will. And all these players get $10,000 in free play if they commit to UNLV.
Isn't that illegal?
Hey, it's underground. So nobody knows about it. If we get investigated, it'll definitely result in a firing and what do they call it?
Sanctions?
No, when they take away wins.
Oh,
what's the word?
You vacate them or whatever.
Yeah, they'll vacate our 0 wins to this point, but definitely looking forward to play some.
So they're going to knock down your point total so Calvin Ridley loses his bets on the games.
The spread will not be covered every week. But anyway,
ironic because the spread is always covered when you're running offense.
Yes. But excited to get into Mountain West play. Hopefully the competition gets a little bit easier. And yeah, that is part 2 of the Kennesaw State and UNLV Dynasty.
Yes, and now we move over into MLB, and we're going to give you our trade deadline winners and losers as the trade deadline has passed earlier today as we record this. And for me, my winner is the Yankees, who acquired some smooth jazz over the trade deadline, getting Jazz Chisholm from the Miami Marlins, who has immediately played an impact role for the Yankees, already has hit a homer, played really good defense, even some third base out there, which I was not expecting to see, but played some solid third base for the Yankees. And Yankees fans appear to be loving him right now. Let's hope it stays that way and they don't turn on him instantly when he starts to not play well. But I think this is really the best move anyone made since Luis Robert wasn't traded. I think this is kind of the next best thing available. Normally, I'd say it was Randy Arozarena, but he's been so cold this year that don't quite think he was as good. And the Yankees also picked up Mark Leiter Jr. from the Cubs, who is at least solid. So for me, for the Yankees to go out and get a high-profile guy like that, I really think he'll be an injection of life for this team, and so they are my winner of the trade deadline.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement there. The Yankees definitely made a good move in getting Jazz Chisholm, who is actually one of my favorite players in Major League Baseball. Just a super fun player.
Way overhated player.
Yeah, definitely. A guy that I wanted Alex Anthopoulos and the Braves to land at the trade deadline. Unfortunately, the Yankees did beat the Braves to it. And how about Jazz Chisholm homering twice in one game over the weekend with the Yankees? It kind of sucks to see him in as bland of a uniform as the New York Yankees are.
But this is how you bring life to the Yankees. You get fun players. This is the first fun Yankee player since who?
Ooh.
It's been a while.
Fun Yankee. I don't consider Jeter to be a particularly fun player.
Is it Mariano Rivera?
I think it is.
Is it the Glaber Linsanity run?
I think it's Mariano Rivera, and that's been years.
I feel this is the first fun Yankee player. And I did not say good. I did not say good Yankee player. I said the first fun Yankee player. So you guys might disagree with that, but that's where we are in that. Anyway, what were you saying?
Yeah, so definitely a great deadline by the Yankees. I love the move to get Chisholm. Got to give a little bit of a shout out to the Braves for bringing back Jorge Soler.
Soler power.
That made me super happy last night, Monday night. If you're watching this when it actually drops. Monday night, I was very happy when the Braves landed Jorge Soler. Not sure if it's going to yield the results that 2021 did by any means.
Don't forget Jackson.
Yes, Luke Jackson as well out of the bullpen was going to get to him. Jorge Soler, though, kind of re-solidifying the vibes in the Braves locker room, at least for me, just from an internal standpoint.
DFA Duval. DFA Duval. DFA Duval.
Yeah, I'm also chanting that in my head as we speak. Would have loved to get Jock Peterson as well to just bring the whole band back together. Unfortunately, couldn't get that done as he's still on the Diamondbacks, but excited to see Jorge Soler. But my winner of the trade deadline this season is actually the Los Angeles Dodgers, who made a flurry of moves and have a lot more depth now than they had, and a lot of it due to the fact that have suffered some injuries this season. Mookie Betts missing some time currently with an injury. The Dodgers went out and got Kevin Kiermaier, Jack Flaherty, Ahmed Rosario, brought him back, Tommy Edman, and Michael Kopech, who from a White Sox team who was also rumored to maybe take some calls about Crochet and Robert. I feel very sorry for Crochet and Robert, who are stuck on what is an atrocious White Sox team. But just the influx of not necessarily top-end talent, although I will say Jack Flaherty was a really good get for a Dodgers rotation that has been absolutely riddled with injuries this season.
Desperately.
You just got back Kershaw, but Yamamoto's been down. Bobby Miller's been down. Walker Buehler's been down. Obviously, Shohei's not pitching this season. So you bring in a starter from the Tigers who has been the clear number 2. Obviously, Skubal is the number 1 for the Tigers. He also did not get moved. But I really like that move especially. And then just some bench guys in Kiermaier and Edman. I'm not sure if Ahmed Rosario is going to start or not. But kind of a quantity over quality type deal for me. I think these moves are quality enough to where you don't necessarily get a position player that really moves the needle. But I like this deadline a lot for the Dodgers in general. So they are my winners of the trade deadline.
Yeah, and my loser is going to be the Oakland A's, which might sound a bit weird, but there was so much value for them to get back here at this deadline, and they kind of partly were forced not to and partly couldn't. Mason Miller, obviously with the injury after punching a table, which resulted in them not being able to trade him at the deadline, so you lost out on a ton of value there because I think you'd have had a huge market.
It is fun to see him stay there, though,
it is,
in my opinion.
It is. And then Brent Rooker. Brent Rooker's the big one for me. You could have traded him. He is an older player. He is not the cornerstone of a rebuild as long as it's going to take you to rebuild this team.
And he's not going to get more valuable in the future than he is right now.
He's been incredible this season. This is his peak
OPS.
value. Yeah, this is his peak value. And you just held on to him. You're reluctant to trade him. For what reason? Why are the A's suddenly like, oh, we want to build around guys? It's too late to do that with Brent Rooker, honestly, and you could have got so much value for him back. I don't get it at all. And the fact then, I don't know that they would have traded Mason Miller regardless, but the fact that you were forced not to by the injury, just those two things combined, I think makes the A's my biggest loser of the deadline.
Yeah, definitely a team that did not take advantage of what was a seller's market this season. You saw a lot of big prospect hauls by a lot of these teams, and kind of in that same frame of thinking, it's going to be the Houston Astros for me.
Holy cow, what a trade.
Yeah. They get Yusei Kikuchi from the Toronto Blue Jays, but they trade away a lot of top-of-the-line prospects in their organization. They lose Jake Bloss. I forget the other two, but
I think it's their 2nd, their 9th, and their 21st or something like that.
Yeah, just a crazy haul for a rental. Kikuchi is only under contract for the rest of this season.
This isn't even all-star Kikuchi either.
No.
He has not been the same player with the Blue Jays.
And it seems like the AL has been opening up over the past few weeks. The Yankees haven't been as dominant, although they've been pretty good this weekend and this week. The Orioles have kind of fallen off a little bit. The Guardians have fallen off a lot. Obviously, the Mariners have fallen off a lot to blow that 10-game lead.
I love the Guardians' acquisition of Lane Thomas.
That was a really good trade, a guy that I actually wanted on the Braves before we traded for Jorge Soler. I do think Soler was a little bit better get for the Braves, but anyway, the Astros should have added more, in my opinion. The AL's wide open. I think for the first time in a while, even though the AL did beat the NL in the All-Star game again, I think the NL is a deeper league this season than the American League.
Which is weird to say, but you look at the NL wildcard fight right now. I know it's been so close, and a lot of years it's been because the teams are bad. Those teams are improving, whereas the AL, it seems like it's very top-heavy, and then you just fall off a cliff. Like, the Rays are not good. The bottom two in the AL West are awful. The White Sox are awful. The Tigers are really bad. Like, it's a cliff once you hit it in the AL this year. And with these guys getting traded, I don't understand this for the Astros at all. It felt like they kind of did a worse version of what the Mariners did, trading for Arozarena, just on the opposite side of the game. Because the Mariners acquisition, at least you know that Arozarena has that potential more recently, and even though you're in a big struggling lineup, and you never really want to make a trade with the Rays because they always manage to win them somehow, but Arozarena at least has that upside, where with Kikuchi it just feels like you were scrambling to find anything you could, and you're like, him, take our guys, and just kind of gave him away at the last second. And you look at what the Dodgers gave up for Jack Flaherty compared to what the Astros gave up for Yusei Kikuchi. This is not the normal savvy move you'd expect from the Astros at all. It doesn't make sense.
And it's a little disappointing because the general manager of the Astros is actually Dana Brown, who was the second in command over with the Braves. He was under Alex Anthopoulos until the 2023 season. So this, if he's a guy that is a product of what I'll call the Alex Anthopoulos tree, this was not a characteristic move of Alex Anthopoulos at all. And I think the Astros are going to regret this one. Yeah. Not only this year, but in years beyond, as I think Jake Bloss and these other prospects have potential to make them really regret this trade.
Yeah, and honestly, Blue Jays could have been my deadline winner as well, because it was a good move to not trade Bo Bichette while his value was so low. Thank goodness they kept Vlad Jr., because he's been going off. I think the fans would have rioted if you traded him. He's been incredible. So I think, honestly, the Blue Jays might be in the hunt for the first wild card spot next season if Bo Bichette can get back on form and they can kind of reload and regroup. So great move from them to offload what was frankly not a great contract in Kikuchi and bring in that haul. Great trade deadline from the Blue Jays.
For sure.
And I think that is pretty much it for this week, unless there was anything else you wanted to add. So
I think that's good.
That'll be it. And then next week, we'll be back talking you guys through our conference championship game predictions. Even though we kind of mentioned that a little bit today, we'll really get into it a lot more next week. Obviously, have some more MLB stuff ready to go as well. But that is it, and we will see you guys next week.